I've seen a lot of disturbing things online, but nothing haunts me quite like the phenomenon of spontaneous human combustion, SHC. Imagine waking up in the middle of the night to the smell of burning flesh, only to find that someone you love has been reduced to ash and bone, their body charred beyond recognition, but the rest of the room completely untouched. Sounds impossible, right? Yet for centuries, cases like this have been reported all over the world. Bodies found burned from the inside out, leaving behind only a few unburned limbs or skull fragments. The scariest part? No one really knows why it happens. The earliest documented case of spontaneous human combustion dates back to the 1700s. In 1731, an Italian woman named Countess Cornelia Bandi was found burned to ashes in her bedroom. Only her legs and part of her skull remained. Her bed, furniture and surroundings were untouched. Witnesses described a greasy soot covering the walls, and the remains had an odor unlike any normal fire. It didn't make sense. How could a person burn so intensely without setting their surroundings on fire? And why did it seem like the flames came from inside them? Modern scientists have tried to explain SHC with a theory called the wick effect. This theory suggests that under the right conditions, a person's body fat can ignite, acting like candle wax, causing a slow-burning fire. Clothing may act as a wick, drawing melted fat upward, sustaining the flames until the body is reduced to ash. But even if this were true, it doesn't explain everything. How do these fires start without an external ignition source? And why do victims often remain completely motionless, as if they never even tried to escape? In 1951, Mary Reeser, a 67-year-old woman from Florida, was found burned to ashes in her living room. Her skull had shrunk to the size of a teacup, a detail that defied normal physics. The chair she sat in was mostly intact, and a candle nearby had melted completely. Yet the surrounding room showed no signs of extreme heat. The only clue, a small pile of black, greasy soot. Another case in 1980 involved Henry Thomas, a 73-year-old man from Wales. He was found in his home, his entire body incinerated, but his socks and pants were untouched. How can a fire be so precise, so selective, burning only the flesh while leaving the surroundings intact? Some researchers believe SHC isn't just a freak accident, it's something else entirely. A few theories include electrostatic discharges. Some believe an unseen electrical buildup inside the body can trigger sudden combustion. Psychic energy. A radical idea suggests extreme stress or suppressed emotions might ignite a fire from within. Demonic forces. Religious texts often describe people bursting into flames as punishment for sin. Could SHC be something ancient? Something watching? Then there's the creepiest theory of all. What if SHC isn't random? What if someone or something chooses its victims? One of the weirdest details about SHC victims is that many of them were found alone. No witnesses, no struggle, no sign they even noticed the fire before it consumed them. In some cases, their pets were found unharmed, just sitting near the remains. And in 1998, a woman named Jeannie Safin burst into flames in front of her family. Her father watched in horror as blue flames engulfed her face. But the fire made no sound, and Jeannie sat there completely silent, as if she didn't even realize she was burning. Could these victims have been paralyzed before the fire started? Did they even have time to scream? In 1979, a deadly fire broke out in Luna Park, an amusement park in Sydney. 7 people, including children, burned alive inside a ride called the Ghost Train. Authorities blamed faulty wiring, but survivors reported something chilling. They smelled kerosene in the air before the fire even started. Some believe this was an arson attack orchestrated by a powerful crime syndicate trying to claim the land. But a forensic analyst noted something bizarre. Some of the burn patterns on the victims matched those of SHC cases. What if the fire wasn't just arson? What if it was a test, a way to trigger SHC under controlled conditions? And if that's true, then someone out there knows how to make people burn from the inside out. Here's where it gets terrifying. Since the early 2000s, cases of SHC have been disappearing from public records. Some researchers believe the phenomenon isn't stopping, it's being covered up. Why? Because if there is a pattern, if someone has figured out how SHC really works, then this isn't spontaneous at all. It's controlled. And the next victim could be anyone. Spontaneous human combustion remains one of the most disturbing and unsolved phenomena in history. Science can't explain it. Religion fears it. And if some theories are true, we were never meant to understand it. The Oklahoma City bombing was one of the deadliest domestic terror attacks in U.S. history. At 9:02 a.m. on April 19, 1995, a massive explosion tore through the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, killing 168 people and injuring hundreds more. Investigators combed through the wreckage for weeks, identifying bodies, reuniting remains with families. But then they found something impossible, a severed human leg, a single limb that didn't match any of the victims. DNA testing confirmed that every identified body had all their limbs accounted for. So where did the extra leg come from? And if the leg belonged to someone else, where was the rest of the body? At first, officials assumed the leg belonged to Lakeisha Levy, a victim whose remains were being prepared for burial. But when the funeral home began the process, they made a chilling discovery. Lakeisha already had both her legs. She was about to be buried with two left legs. One was hers, the other a complete mystery. The unidentified leg was sent for DNA analysis, expected to provide a quick answer. Instead, the results were inconclusive. No match to Lakeisha Levy, no match to any victim, no match to any missing person in the national database. This leg, severed, burned, and found in the wreckage of a terrorist attack, belonged to someone who officially did not exist. As news of the extra leg spread, theories began to circulate. Was there an unidentified victim of the bombing? Did the explosion reveal a hidden body that had been there long before the attack? Or, as some suggested, was this proof of something far more sinister? Some researchers pointed out a chilling possibility. What if the leg belonged to someone who was never meant to be discovered? Federal buildings often have underground areas, classified rooms, holding cells, even tunnels. Could the bombing have exposed a hidden crime? If so, who was this person? And why had their remains been left there to begin with? Stranger details began to emerge in the years following the bombing. Witnesses reported seeing unidentified military personnel searching the site before local authorities arrived. Documents related to the bombing disappeared. Reports were sealed, and every attempt to get official answers about the leg was met with silence. Some theories push the limits of belief. One suggests the leg belonged to a time traveler caught in the explosion, their body removed from existence except for this one impossible remnant. Another claims it was proof of a parallel reality, where someone who didn't exist in our world briefly crossed over, only to die in the blast. Sounds crazy, right? But ask yourself this. If it was just a mistake, why is there no official explanation? Journalists who attempted to investigate the unidentified leg received anonymous messages telling them to drop the story. One reporter, who had been digging into FBI documents about the bombing, claimed her house was broken into, her files stolen. Another researcher said their emails about the case were mysteriously deleted, not by them. It was as if someone didn't want people asking questions. The FBI's final public statement on the case was vague. We believe all victims have been accounted for and no further remains are missing. But that wasn't true, because one leg was still unclaimed and its owner never found. The OKC bombing left behind a tragedy that can never be forgotten. But among the wreckage, the victims, and the devastation, it also left behind a mystery, a single leg, a missing body, and the terrifying possibility that the truth has been buried forever. There are badly written games, and then there's hybrid RPG. At first glance, it looks like a typical tabletop role-playing game, a book filled with rules, stats, and mechanics for players to follow. But the moment you open it, you realize something is deeply wrong. There are 551 rules, but none of them make sense. Some pages have random numbers scattered across them. Others contain paragraphs that start normally but dissolve into gibberish halfway through. One section describes how to level up your character, right next to a chocolate chip cookie recipe. Another page is a rant about 1990s action movies, wedged between tables of damage calculations that contradict themselves. Trying to understand hybrid RPG is like trying to decipher a madman's diary, and the deeper you go, the worse it gets. Most people assume hybrid RPG is a joke, a troll project meant to frustrate anyone who reads it, but some players have a different theory. What if the game was never meant to be played? What if it was designed for something else? In 2018, a group of players on an obscure gaming forum tried to decipher the rules using AI software. They ran text analysis programs, hoping to untangle the nonsense. What they found was disturbing. Certain words, when placed in the right order, formed hidden instructions, a set of rules that weren't originally visible. And worse, those rules weren't written in the book. The origins of hybrid RPG are murky. The game's creator, known only as Bill Underwood, was an independent designer who worked on small projects in the late 90s. There are no interviews with him, no photos. The only thing anyone knows about him comes from a single email he sent to a game distributor in 2001. The email read, "The game is finished. It works, but you have to read between the lines. Once you understand it, you can't unsee it." Then he disappeared. Some pages in hybrid RPG contain long strings of numbers scattered between the text. Most assumed it was nonsense, until someone noticed that when arranged a certain way, the numbers formed GPS coordinates. The coordinates led to an abandoned building in Chicago. A group of players decided to visit the site, hoping to find clues. What they found was a single room, empty except for a chair in the center, and on the wall, the words "read between the lines" were scratched into the concrete. In 2003, a small group of tabletop enthusiasts claimed they had actually played hybrid RPG. They described the game as incomprehensible, yet somehow they felt compelled to keep going. It was like we weren't playing it. It was playing us, one player wrote in a now-deleted forum post. Over time, their posts became stranger. One player claimed that after multiple sessions, they started having vivid dreams about the game, numbers flashing in their minds, whispering voices repeating the phrase, "Once you understand it, you can't unsee it." Then the players stopped posting entirely. Their accounts were abandoned. One of the strangest things about hybrid RPG is that no two copies seem to be identical. Some editions contain pages that don't exist in others. Certain rules appear to rewrite themselves. Phrases slightly altered, numbers rearranged, new words appearing where there were none before. Players have tried to scan the book, digitizing its contents, but every scanned copy turns out corrupted. No one can seem to preserve the full version, as if the game refuses to be recorded. A user on an obscure gaming Discord claimed to have acquired a rare first edition of hybrid RPG. He began live streaming himself reading it, flipping through each page. Viewers watched as he tried to make sense of the text. Then, 45 minutes into the stream, he stopped. For 10 full minutes, he just sat there, staring at the book. Then he closed it. "I get it now," he whispered, and without another word, he ended the stream. He was never seen online again. No one knows the true purpose of hybrid RPG. Was it just the ramblings of a disorganized creator, a cryptic ARG, alternate reality game that went too far? Or is there really something hidden inside it? A message, a set of rules that only reveal themselves when you read the book in just the right way? One thing is certain. Those who have played it say the same thing. Once you understand it, you can't unsee it. Hybrid RPG is more than just a game. It's a puzzle, a warning, and a mystery all rolled into one. And maybe, just maybe, it was never meant for us to play. The internet is filled with abandoned projects, forgotten websites, unfinished games, half-built programs. But Temple OS is different. It wasn't made for profit. It wasn't designed for efficiency. It was built for God. At least that's what its creator claimed. Temple OS was a self-made operating system, coded entirely by one man. Terry A. Davis. He spent over a decade building it from scratch, believing he was following divine instructions. The system had no internet access, no modern UI, but it had something no other OS had: a built-in oracle meant to communicate with God himself. And that's where the story gets deeply unsettling. Before Temple OS, Terry Davis was a brilliant programmer. In the 1990s, he worked on advanced operating systems, showing a level of skill that few could match. But something changed. He started talking about visions, messages from God, telling him he had been chosen. By the early 2000s, he had isolated himself, devoting his life to a single mission, building a system where God could speak to him directly. It wasn't a metaphor, he meant it literally. Temple OS wasn't just an ordinary operating system, it was deliberately outdated. Terry claimed God had specified every detail. The resolution had to be 640 x 480 pixels, no higher. The color palette had to be 16 colors, no more, no less. There could be no internet connection, only a direct, sacred interface. God told me computers reached perfection in the 80s, he once said. This wasn't just an OS, it was a temple built in digital form, and inside that temple was something truly strange. Temple OS had a feature that no other system had, a built-in oracle that would generate random words from scripture whenever prompted. Users could type a question, any question, and the system would provide a divine answer. Terry believed these responses weren't random. He believed they were God's voice speaking through the machine. He spent hours asking it questions, analyzing every reply, and sometimes the answers were terrifying. As Temple OS spread, more people started experimenting with the oracle. They asked it casual questions. Some got bizarre, nonsensical phrases, but others got responses that felt too specific. People would type something random, only to receive Bible verses that seemed directly connected to their lives. One user asked, "What happens after death?" The system replied, "A dark place, and I will see you there." Another asked, "Who are you?" The response, "I am watching." Was it pure coincidence, or was there something else lurking inside Temple OS? Terry believed he was a prophet, chosen by God to create Temple OS. But his messages became increasingly erratic. He began speaking in frantic, paranoid rants, claiming he was being hunted by the CIA. He accused strangers of being agents sent to stop him. His behavior became so unstable that he was banned from multiple forums. Some say Temple OS was proof of a genius mind lost to madness, but others wonder if Terry really was talking to something, but it wasn't God. After Terry's death in 2018, strange rumors spread online. A group of programmers attempted to reverse engineer Temple OS, trying to figure out how it worked. That's when they found something they couldn't explain. There were lines of code that shouldn't be there, encrypted messages, random strings of numbers hidden deep inside the OS. When decoded, some of these numbers resembled radio frequencies, and one matched a classified military signal. Some theorists believe Temple OS may have accidentally tapped into something else, some kind of hidden frequency, a signal meant for something other than humans. In his last years, Terry's paranoia consumed him. He was homeless, wandering the streets, still convinced that he had built something divine. He was hit by a train in 2018. Some say it was an accident. Others believe he knew too much. Temple OS is still out there. Anyone can download it. Anyone can use the oracle. But be careful, because some say the system remembers every question that's ever been asked. And when you type a question into Temple OS, something is typing back. Was Temple OS the work of a brilliant but unstable mind? Or did Terry Davis really hear something through his machine? No one knows for sure. But one thing is certain, when you open Temple OS, you're not alone. Art is meant to challenge us, to make us uncomfortable, to push the limits of human expression. But how far is too far? Chris Burden was not just an artist. He was a man obsessed with pain, danger, and the thin line between life and death. He wasn't interested in paintings or sculptures. He used his own body as a canvas. And in 1971, he did something that no one had ever dared to do. He shot himself. not by accident, not in private, but on purpose, in front of a live audience. And it was only the beginning of something much darker. The piece was called Shoot. Burden stood against a white wall, expressionless, while a friend aimed a .22 caliber rifle at his left arm. Then, bang! The bullet pierced his skin, blood immediately blooming through his white shirt. The audience gasped, some screaming, others frozen in shock. Burden barely reacted. The performance lasted only a few seconds, but it changed everything. Burden claimed Shoot was a statement on violence and control. It was the height of the Vietnam War, a time when Americans were growing numb to images of real death on their TV screens. So Burden brought the violence to them, forcing his audience to feel the horror firsthand. But was that really his goal? Or was Burden chasing something else, something deeper, darker? Shoot was not an isolated event. Burden's performances became increasingly dangerous, each one pushing the limits of what a human body could endure. In one piece, he crucified himself on the back of a Volkswagen Beetle, his hands nailed to the roof. In another, he locked himself in a school locker for 5 days, refusing food and water. He even crawled across broken glass, bleeding onto the pavement, while people watched in horror. Each act had a message, but it also felt like he was testing himself, seeing how close he could get to death without crossing over. Rumors began to spread that Burden had planned one final stunt, one so extreme that it had to be kept secret. The story goes that in 1979, Burden was invited to a private event, attended only by select individuals from the art world. There, he allegedly performed a piece that has never been publicly acknowledged, one that involved setting himself on fire. For years, whispers of this secret performance circulated among underground art circles. Some claimed footage existed, showing Burden engulfed in flames, his body rigid, his face emotionless, but no one could produce the tape. And those who claimed to have seen it, they refused to talk. After the alleged fire performance, Burden's art shifted dramatically. He abandoned self-harm. He moved away from public stunts. He refused to answer questions about his early work. It was as if he had seen something, felt something, during those performances that had fundamentally changed him. Some believe Burden's performances were more than just art. They were rituals, a way of getting as close to death as possible without actually dying. Maybe, for a brief moment, Burden crossed over, and maybe something crossed back with him. Burden lived until 2015, spending his final years working on large-scale sculptures and public installations. His later work was strangely normal, far from the disturbing performances of his past. But he never spoke about Shoot or his other early works in depth. And he never confirmed or denied the rumors about the fire performance. After Burden's death, a private art collector claimed to have found something strange, a single VHS tape, unmarked, hidden in a storage unit that once belonged to an art gallery. The collector never revealed its contents, but in a leaked email he wrote, "If this is real, then Burden did something that should have never been done." The email disappeared from public archives days later. Was Chris Burden simply an artist who wanted to shock the world, or was he chasing something else? Something beyond human understanding? And if the lost footage does exist, maybe it's better that no one ever sees it. On June 9, 1979, families poured into Luna Park, an amusement park in Sydney, Australia. Children laughed, neon lights flashed, and the scent of popcorn filled the air. But by the end of the night, 7 people would be burned alive. What was originally ruled as an accidental fire is now believed to be something much darker, a cover-up involving organized crime, government corruption, and possibly something even worse. The fire started inside the Ghost Train, a dark ride filled with cheap props and animatronics. At 10:15 p.m., a thick cloud of smoke poured out of the tunnel entrance. Then the screams started. Witnesses said they heard people banging on the walls from the inside, begging for help. But within minutes, the entire structure was engulfed in flames. By the time firefighters arrived, there was nothing left but charred metal and bones. Among the dead were 6 children and 1 adult. The most tragic case was John Godson, and his two young sons, Damien and Craig. When the fire broke out, Godson managed to push his oldest son out of the train, saving his life, but he and his youngest son never made it out. Their bodies were later found burned beyond recognition, huddled together in the wreckage. At first, authorities claimed the fire was caused by an electrical fault, but something didn't add up. Survivors reported smelling kerosene before the fire started. Several witnesses saw two men acting suspiciously near the ghost train that night. One boy, who barely escaped, said a man blocked the exit, telling him to go back inside. Even stranger, the security footage from that night mysteriously disappeared. Years later, an investigation uncovered something shocking. The land that Luna Park sat on was highly valuable real estate, and one man wanted it badly, Abe Saffron, a notorious crime boss known as Mr. Sin. Saffron was involved in drugs, illegal casinos, and arson-for-hire schemes. Several sources later claimed Saffron ordered the fire so he could take control of the land. And the worst part, authorities may have helped cover it up. One man, a former firefighter, later confessed that he had been pressured to sign off on the electrical fault explanation. Another survivor, who spoke about seeing men pouring liquid near the ride, was later threatened and refused to speak again. Even journalists who investigated the case reported strange warnings, anonymous calls telling them to drop the story. But here's where it gets really disturbing. A photo taken that night shows something that no one can explain. A few hours before the fire, a family took a series of photos inside Luna Park. One of them shows a man in a grotesque devil mask standing near the ghost train. The costume was bizarre, unlike any of the park's attractions, and his eyes were completely black. But the strangest part, no one remembers seeing a costume performer like that in the park that night. It's as if the figure appeared only in the photo, and shortly after it was taken, the fire erupted. Some believe the Luna Park fire was purely an arson attack, a way for crime bosses to get what they wanted. But others, they think something else happened that night. Some survivors reported feeling uneasy moments before the fire, as if something was watching them. The ghost train had a section that depicted hell, and that's where the fire started. And then there's the mystery man in the devil mask, who was never identified. Could the fire have been more than just arson? Could it have been something ritualistic? Some theorists believe the fire was never meant to kill anyone, at least not at first. They point to inconsistencies in the body count with some records, suggesting that more people entered the ride than were found afterward. Could some children have been taken before the fire even started? And if so, where did they go? More than 40 years later, the Luna Park fire remains one of Australia's most controversial tragedies. Despite new investigations, the case has never been fully reopened. The land was eventually redeveloped, exactly as crime boss Abe Saffron had wanted. And those who know the truth, they've stayed silent. The official story says the fire was just an accident, but the evidence tells a different story, one of corruption, missing evidence, and secrets buried under ashes. And maybe, just maybe, the devil in the photograph was always there, waiting,